Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome along to another episode of EOTT with me, Jimmy James. And as you can see, it's a beautiful sunny afternoon in Swindon, and I'm lucky enough today to have come in speaking with us is Darryl Bickler. Darryl is qualified UK solicitor. He's been active in drug policy for the last 15 years and is a drugs policy activist. Good afternoon, Darryl, and thank you for coming along. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks, Jimmy, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure, I must say. And we've literally only known each other a few days. Just to explain, I found Darryl on the Breaking Convention this year. And his abstract was all about, there's no such thing as illegal drugs, which just resonated with me immediately. So I've contacted Darryl, and he's been happy enough to come along and have a chat with us. If you'd be kind enough, brother, would you give us a little background of a progressive path and how you got to where you are now, please?
Yes. Just before I start, something happened with the video then. It just seemed to freeze.
Can you hear me, Darryl?
Yeah, I can hear you now, yes. So.
Oh, okay. Did you hear what I said then?
Yes, I did.
Awesome.
So.
Fire away, sir.
Well, I was working as a criminal solicitor in Yorkshire, and I had an awful lot of drugs cases, mainly sort of heroin and importation cases. And I must say that they did get me down. I had a lot of young people who were selling heroin just to cover their own habit, a small amount of wraps. And this was all legal aid work. And I could see that these lads were not bad lads. And I decided to go the extra mile and really try and get the Legal Aid Board to do everything they could for a small-time heroin dealer in Bradford. And that involved an awful lot of money and getting things such as an in-depth personality assessment by a psychologist and a psychiatric assessment and other extra things that had to appeal to the Legal Aid Board to provide. And I did all this work, including visiting the young man in his young offenders institution day after day, week after week, because he was vulnerable. And when I got to court and I presented all of this, the judge in his summing up said that, Mr. Bickler, your client is a cancer in society, and my only reservation is that the law does not allow me to send him to prison for long enough, that he will go to prison for 6 years. And at that point, I thought, I just spent, £30,000 of public money and provided the truth about what's really happening on the streets, and it's just being dismissed. And I became pretty depressed about that. On another case I was working on, I wasn't the instructed solicitor, but I was helping because I had a connection with a gentleman who was selling entheogenic plants imported from South America, plants like San Pedro and the ingredients to make ayahuasca. And I was particularly interested in these because I'd traveled to South America. In fact, my wife's from Peru, and I know a little bit about these plants. And I heard that he'd been prosecuted for importing Class A drugs, and he was looking at a very long sentence just for dried plant material, and these plants are not actually thought of as controlled drugs at all. And what happened was that I'd written a letter previously to the Home Office complaining about the way the law had been misconstrued about the idea of a preparation of drugs. Now, a preparation of a drug is actually a chemical term that it represents. It's a noun. It's what the actual substance is. But they changed it to something they called the hand of man test, which was like the verb to prepare. So if you dry the mushrooms, you've prepared them, kind of thing. Or if you dry the cactus, you've prepared it. And I wrote to the Home Office saying that I didn't think this was right. And I actually had a letter back from their policy expert who said, yes, we can see your point that it's not clear. So this letter was produced in evidence in court for this case regarding the San Pedro and ayahuasca ingredients. And actually, partly thanks to that, although I wasn't representing this gentleman, but partly thanks to that, he got off. And my name was mentioned in the judgment from Kingston Crown Court. And what happened was that a gentleman called Casey Hardison, who I'd sort of only heard of through the grapevine, he was an LSD chemist. and he was serving 20 years. He'd been arrested in Brighton for manufacturing of LSD, DMT, and other substances, MDMA as well. And he was serving 20 years. And I had this call in the middle of the night, and I could hardly believe it when I heard this American accent saying, "This is Casey William Hardison. I want to talk to you, Darryl Bickler. I need help." And he was known as the Wizard, and he had an incredible intellect. And it was almost like he was Spock from Star Trek with his mobile phone, because obviously he had to make phone calls in prison, and really I was really on the edge whether I should even receive calls from a prisoner in the middle of the night. I worked out in my head that needs must, and if this was his way of communication, I would accept it, even if it did compromise me professionally. But I decided to accept it.
Fair play to you.
Yeah, and he used to sort of like have a mobile phone, and he would dismantle it, and then he would have to insert all the pieces up his private areas at night to hide them. And so, it was an amazing time when he would call me most every night and talk about the law. And my first idea was that when you have a criminal client and you're a qualified solicitor, you've got to sort of show them the way and take control, take the reins, and say what's possible, because otherwise you'd be spending weeks running around in circles. Whereas with Casey, it was completely opposite. I soon realized I was dealing with a massive intellect, far greater than mine. And actually, my job was almost like, he was mentoring me about what was possible. And I was quite cynical about what I was saying. I said, "Casey, look, you've made illegal drugs, haven't you? You 20 years, I feel really sorry for you, but there's nothing we can do. Illegal drugs are illegal drugs." And this went on, and he came back to me and said, "Well, look, illegal drugs, they're not illegal drugs, are they? It's called controlled drugs." "Yeah, well, what's the difference?" And we talked and talked about it. And it dawned on me eventually that he was onto something. He was really onto something. And he started to write. He'd already produced his own legal arguments, but they had been a little bit naive. He was trying to fight the law. He was trying to say the law was completely wrong, and he should have the freedom to do whatever he wanted. But he started to change. He wrote these articles called "We Have a Problem, Time for a Paradigm Shift," in 2 parts. And as those were being written, this is when we started to really break down the law. And we realized actually that the rule of law could be our friend, because it's not that the law is the law is the law. It's that there is a primary law that Parliament enacts, and that hands the government of the day administrative powers to operate that law to keep it up to date. So with the Misuse of Drugs Act, for example, people say, let's change the law, it's out of date. Well, actually, Casey recognised that it was what he called an evolutive law, in that it has provisions within it, firstly to appoint an advisory council called the ACMD, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, who are an expert body, multidisciplinary body, who can basically advise government, not tell government what to do, by the way. I mean, David Nutt was chair for 10 years, and I think he felt that because he was an expert in the area, that he should tell the government what to do. And it is an advisory role. But nevertheless, what happens is that the law has regulatory apparatus within it. So there's some sections in the law, and if anybody wants to look them up later on, the sections are section 7 and section 22 and section 31.
I'm sure people will.
Beg your pardon?
I'm sorry, I was just saying I'm sure people will check up now, yeah.
And basically,
as good as they can.
Well, what these sections do is that they show that the law is there to make provision with respect to controlled drugs, to regulate this, under the premise that we need to reduce social harms caused by drug misuse. And let's remember that it is the Misuse of Drugs Act, not the Use of Drugs Act, or even the Use of Some Drugs Act, because once we get into this idea that we have illegal drugs, then we must have legal drugs. And of course, what the idea of legal drugs means, legal drugs means that people, not drugs, but people making dangerous drugs and causing antisocial problems are deemed to be outside of the very law that Parliament enacted to stop it. So we've got this, what we call the artificial divide, going right down the middle between so-called legal and illegal drugs. And this, Casey realised there was something very wrong here. So we started to produce very detailed legal arguments. Well, in fact, I can't take credit for those. I mean, we discussed things, but really, Casey produced these incredible documents. Now, I have to say, sometimes a 65-page legal argument for seeking permission for judicial review is not right. But Casey wanted everything in. But you know, this is where we started. And nowadays, Casey was released a few years ago, having served almost 10 years in prison for these offences. So we were unsuccessful in getting him out. And there's quite a lot of stories behind that. We can explore them if you're interested, but I don't want to get too historical without looking at, you know, the things that really matter today. But Casey was served 10 years, but the arguments that he developed and the ideas that I've gleaned from that and the ideas that I've worked with ever since are just as relevant today, if not more so, because what he uncovered was incredible. So what we had was almost like the marriage of an LSD chemist and a lawyer. And together, with Casey's energy and intellect, we broke down the law in a way that is absolutely revolutionary and will transform the relationship that we have with controlled drugs. But it will take time for the public to understand the incredible nature of this discussion, because it is not something that you hear every day. The things that I'm talking about are nothing like any argument that you will hear from the other drug policy reform outfits, such as Transform Drug Policy Foundation or any of the international bodies, because we have got a unique perspective. And as a lawyer, I'm completely convinced that it is legally right. It's difficult at first to understand because of the linguistic programming that we have. It's the linguistic programming that makes people, leads people to reject what I'm saying, because linguistically they think it doesn't make sense, because we've been programmed to accept a certain form of language. But I have to say, Jimmy, about that is that when people accuse me of playing with semantics, and I'm talking about the law, I find it unbelievable that legal policy experts will play fast and loose with the word legal or illegal, as if you could just fill it in with any old lay language and it doesn't matter. And let me tell you straight away, illegal drugs do not exist. And they do not exist simply because legality is a construct that applies to our actions. It doesn't apply to objects. So, like, for example, people think, guns are illegal, but of course they can't be, because the government and industry produces millions. The police have them, the army have them, private detectives bodyguards, they have them. So how could they be illegal? They can't be. What's illegal is the unauthorized carrying of a firearm or possession of a firearm without the Home Office firearm certificate or license or exemption. And it's the same thing with guns, with drugs, is that drugs cannot be illegal at all. It can only be something that you do with a drug. Now, people already will be jumping up and saying, well, what is the difference between a drug which is illegal to possess without authority and an illegal drug? Isn't it the same thing? Well, I have to say, on many levels, it isn't. And it does take time for it to sink in, because even philosophically, it's a huge leap. Philosophically, the idea that the government controls objects, it controls the very molecules of existence. It doesn't. It can control us by a certain amount of consent through the social contract, through democracy, it can control our actions. But the idea that it controls drugs at all is a misnomer. It's just a figure of speech. And I will give my example that I always use. I'm sorry if people have heard it before, but about how this works is that in speech, we have a figure of speech, and it's called a transferred epithet. Don't panic. This isn't very technical. I know it sounds like it's going to get a bit technical, but it's just the name we give to a figure of speech. And that figure of speech is something, it's a shortcut that we use to make life simpler. So, like in prisons, they used to have a thing called a condemned cell. Now, a condemned cell is not a cell that an inspector has looked at and said, this is not fit for human habitation, or it needs to be painted or decorated at all. It's not the cell which is condemned. It's a cell for a condemned prisoner. But what we do in speech is we cut out the human. Same with a disabled toilet. It's not a broken toilet. It's a disabled person. So we cut out the human out of it because we know what we mean. And it doesn't matter. Do it as much as you like. But when you do it with the idea of legality, then I submit to everybody that we're now in the arena of law. As soon as you evoke the idea of legality, we're not in lay common parlance area at all. We're straight now into law. And bear in mind, the law is made of words. Just as a house is made of bricks and concrete and the rest of it, the law is made of words, and those words will lock you up. If it says may or could, those words are significant. And when you play with legal words, you've got to know what you're doing. And the worst invention ever that has taken over the entire debate is the idea of illegal versus legal drugs, because they do not exist in law. There's no such thing. Now, in law, we have something called controlled drugs. Now, before you think those are drugs which are controlled, think again. For two reasons they're not. Firstly, controlled drugs is an oxymoron, i.e. it's completely not happening. It's an absurd way of describing it because obviously, clearly rather, we've lost control over controlled drugs. Otherwise, there wouldn't be all these fatalities and other terrible effects that are happening because of the misuse of drugs. So drugs are not controlled in reality. But going back to my transferred epithet, we can see that actually controlled drugs can't really exist. It's not the drugs which are controlled. It's us who are regulated, controlled with respect to controlled drugs. So we have agency, objects don't. So as soon as you claim that an object is illegal, then you're acting illegally before you even get out of bed in the morning because you've got it in your drawer. I mean, you haven't done anything yet, but it's illegal. Well, no, it isn't. And it's this construct that you have no room for maneuver with an illegal object. So all those regulatory sections that I was referring to before in the Misuse of Drugs Act, which are there to make exemptions and allow people to do things for various purposes, just don't ever come into the discussion because the government will say drugs are illegal because. And then they like it because that means that they can have legal drugs as well, as I mentioned before, which really means people. So always try to bring the people back. So what they're doing is they're drawing a line between people. They're saying you can sell drugs and you can go to prison if you sell your drugs. And that's because we've got legal versus illegal drugs. But this construct is at the heart of prohibition. Prohibition is based upon this. And we accept it because we believe that transferred epithets are the equivalent of the meaning in law, but they're not. There's a huge difference between the idea of control, which infers proportionate regulation. When I say proportionate, I mean respecting human rights, respecting privacy. So the threshold is not crossed. The threshold is when you start creating havoc. If you take some LSD and you're having a nice quiet time, the law shouldn't be interested in what you've taken. It's a private matter. We don't need to come out and say, I've taken LSD. You don't even need to say it. It's a private matter. If you go like streaking down the street screaming and attracting attention to yourself, then perhaps it's now time for the police to intervene, or social service to intervene, or somebody to intervene and say, look, there's a problem here. The drugs are being misused and it's affecting society. But all those possibilities of proportionate regulation and nuances are obscured because we actually have a system which is based upon this illusion, which is actually a mirror image of the law. I don't know if you know why I'm saying it's a mirror image of the law, but it looks the same. At first, people think it's the same. What I'm saying, they can't see the point. What I'm saying, a bit like if I was to put a mirror in front of you and say, "Is that you?" You'd say yes. But of course, it isn't you, because that doesn't hurt you.
Yeah,
Image of you. But the thing that never even concerned you was that actually the left has become the right and the right's become the left, or left and right, whatever way it is when you see that.
Yeah.
But you've been switched. And that switch is what I call a smoke and mirrors deception, because you don't mind. And the same way you don't mind in language, when they switch the subject and the object, you're the legal subject, the drug is the object, and they switched you with words. And that
Old
means
switcheroo.
it literally is a reflection. And I actually picked up on this when the government, the Home Office, said that their policy of prohibition, which means obviously no rights with controlled drugs, except for very, very limited scientific special purposes, and obviously the police and forensics and all these people who are allowed to possess them or handle them. It is a reflection, but it's not the reflected in the way that people mean it, because when you say reflected, it means the same as or consistent with, doesn't it? It means our policy is consistent with the Misuse of Drugs Act. It's reflected. But actually, I realised that they actually do mean reflected. It's actually the opposite, because the Misuse of Drugs Act is an act to make provision for the supply, possession of controlled drugs with proportionate measures to prevent the misuse of those drugs, which could be any drug, including alcohol, tobacco, or any other drug that rightly should be covered, which doesn't mean to say that alcohol and tobacco should be prohibited, because nothing should be prohibited, because nothing is illegal. Only antisocial actions, or those which reasonably may be perceived to lead to antisocial actions, you have to anticipate something. Obviously, you don't just wait with policy for somebody to go and kill somebody. You take measures that precede that, but you do it on the basis of evidence that these will be antisocial actions. So there wouldn't be, for example, any justification at the moment in banning people and locking them up, for their private cannabis use in general, or their microdosing activities, etc. These things should all fall below the radar. And they would do if we followed the rule of law. The rule of law is our friend. This is what people don't quite understand, is that they want to just get rid of the act and come out with a new law which is based upon harm reduction principles. But I say a new law could even be even worse. In fact, the government doesn't have a mandate to protect our health using the law that we have. People say it should do, but actually, what it's actually concerned with is social harm. And it's sort of linked to what you might describe as a John Stuart Mill principle of harm to others. So that is the threshold. But of course, we don't have that being recognised because of the idea of it is illegal anyway. So we don't even worry, the police don't worry about what the outcome of your behaviour was. They just say, well, it's illegal. You have no right to do it. So this is what Casey sort of led me into to working out, and he drafted some beautiful arguments. So, but basically, that brings us up to date, I think, with what the basis of it. But if you've got some questions about that.
No, yeah, awesome. Thank you very much, Darryl. As you say, it's quite an interesting tale there of the master becoming the student and all that kind of jazz, which is intriguing, and it's just, I suppose, it's who you are as a human being, that you were open-minded enough to be able to be receptive to that kind of experience, and to say, actually, do you know what? I've got a bit of a duty here. I've got my kind of field, and he's obviously in his situation. I dare say I'm 999 out of 1,000, if not 999,000 other, you know what I mean, people in the same position would have actually gone, oh, do you know what? No, I'm not going to get involved. But fair play to you, sir. Big respect for actually having the courage of heart to, you know, be the man that you were to do that. A lot of respect for that. So, yeah.
That's very kind of you, Jimmy. I mean, I will just sort of elaborate a bit on that, because...
Can I just ask you, just for 2 seconds, sorry to be a pain, the connection is slightly jumping in and out, and rather than persisting with it, I'm just going to literally slide my table back a bit, because I'm using the facilities again, as you can see, but bear with. Such a professional podcast, Darryl, as you can see. Fledgling days here, fledgling days. But yeah, I think we should be fine. I think we're close to the building. Yeah. Just want it to be, without any interruptions, because this is absolutely fascinating. I'm sure people are going to be getting annoyed with the interruptions. So, where were we? Yeah. Go on. Did you have something to say? Were you on a thread? Sorry, I didn't interrupt.
I was flattered by your remark, but because we've got time, I'll flesh it out a bit, because I'm not here to blow my ego. In fact,
no, not at all. Not at all.
I will say that this has got very little to do with me, no more than anybody else. What I'm talking about really is for everybody. It's everybody's right to exist, both legally and biochemically, if you like, because of this impermeable membrane that the law makes around us, makes us impermeable to all the things that we're naturally permeable to. And, it is for everybody. It's not that I want to sort of make this as my thing.
Of course, no, I'm sure that's pretty, I understand.
I wasn't so open-minded. I mean, when I was telling Casey that I didn't think there was much we could do because his appeal against sentence had already been rejected.
All right.
He actually had to work on me to get me to be open-minded, just to get this in, because I was resisting. And whilst I'm not here to advertise other services as such, I think it's only fair that I mentioned that he sent me to numerous things. He organised this from his prison cell. He had contacts, he had funds, he managed to do things, incredible things. And he sent me to Switzerland, to the World Psychedelic Forum in Basel, to have blotter art signed by Albert Hoffman, to meet people. We even managed to get a broadcast from the prison played live in the closing plenary for the entire conference. More than 1,000 people listening to Casey speaking from prison. This is awesome. how amazing it was.
Well, I think his title, sorry to interrupt, I think his title of The Wizard is well deserved. I'm going to have to try and get him on the podcast for sure, but as you were, sir, go on.
Well, yes. And the other thing he sent me to, because I was resisting, I didn't believe it in this idea of possibility, because I think in today's society, we don't really take a lot of risks and believe that we can do incredible things. We're risk adverse, and we're very protective about our positions, and we don't want to compromise ourselves. And we're quite conservative with a small c about a lot of things. This is just a political reality that we're not as strong as we used to be. So what Casey sent me to was a course actually run by Landmark Education, which was stressing the importance of believing in the possibilities, new possibilities that you have never even thought of, and looking how language shapes the world. So many people think of like our language is just a response to the world as we find it. Actually, language is something which actually creates reality. And this is particularly even more apposite when we're talking about law, because literally that defines you culturally. The whole area of freedom and liberty you have is written in those words. And even more so with drugs, because those drugs are just part of the universe that we're evolving in. They are on planet Earth. They are natural in many cases. I'm not going to go into the natural artificial divide right now, because I think it's not necessarily a relevant distinction. But there are so many things out there which we have receptors for. We're permeable to every kind of, so many different things, even through our skin, lungs, digestive system, everything. We're permeable to these molecules. And yet, somehow or other, we've been separated by these words. The words have actually cocooned us. And that breaks down our relationship with nature and each other, because those words have created barriers which are impermeable. Now, what I'm saying about those regulations, those sections in the Misuse of Drugs Act that make provisions for, that allow reasonable things to happen, that makes the membrane of the law, the barrier that the law creates around us, it makes it semi-permeable, so that reasonable things can come through, so that peaceful permeability, if you like, can occur. But they've created this membrane. It's like for monetary purposes and for sensorial. It's a censorship. Like David Nutt talks about the censorship of science, being like they used to try to ban books. Like the church used to try to control everything. This is equivalent censorship. It's like the censorship of possibility, of reality. It's almost like somebody had taken all the colours that it could possibly be in a huge palette, like you'd have on a design page, and they'd all been blacked out, so you couldn't even see them except for like an old black and white TV. You have a simple black and white grayscale, and you don't even know they're there. Now, when people start asking for cannabis, it's almost like they're saying, well, let's have a bit of green come in. It's just thinking about one thing. I'm not looking at single drugs. I'm not arguing for let mushrooms with this, let's legalize this with mushrooms, or legalize this with cannabis. I would say legalize cannabis for obvious reasons, because I think that plays back into that paradigm that the drug is illegal, and I don't like that. So I'm avoiding all the transfer effects, actually. So even when we say, let's tax drugs, I said, well, drugs don't have any money, they won't pay. Let's regulate drugs. Well, you can't regulate drugs because they don't behave. Now, I know that's now beginning to sound pedantic, but because of the big problem underneath, illegal drugs, legal drugs, I think it's almost necessary to go the whole hog to pull ourselves out of it. But this censorship that we have is incredibly profound, and it needs to be dismantled. Now, the semi-permeability of the legal membrane that surrounds us, the key to making it more permeable is in language, because those controls, those restrictions are made of these words. And when we create with ourselves, when we talk about illegal drugs, we make our own prison. You literally create it. When people say, like, if you overeat, it's like you're digging your own grave with your teeth. It's like when you speak about law and drug policy, like prohibitionists do, that we need to do this with drugs, and drugs are illegal because, and we need to legalize drugs. When you do that, you're literally creating the prohibitionist paradigm with words, and you're reinforcing it, which is why I get upset about it, which is why I've got quite confrontational with a lot of people who are pursuing the paradigm. A lot of people jump into drug policy. They're very well-meaning, or they've probably got some personal experience with drugs. They feel a need to say something, and they follow the paradigm that's been touted by organisations like Transform Drug Policy Foundation and Release and these organisations, and they've got a list of arguments. But unfortunately, these are not biting. They have no traction because they're based on complete fictions. Complete fictions. The whole of the drug policy debate that you will hear in any place in the world, it is completely subsumed by legal fictions. And every time they say these things, they are tying themselves up in knots. You can never escape from the web of deceit that you create as soon as you believe that it's the object which has the legal status instead of yourself. You have to rescue the subject. This is what this is about: rescuing autonomy, rescuing personal choice, creating freedoms, but not to the point of harming others. Whereas at the moment, that doesn't happen. This is because it is on, off, binary. It's legal or illegal. And it isn't. It isn't.
Yeah, you're getting right to the crux of it there, Darryl, and it's quite nice actually, because a lot of the things you're saying are following through threads from completely unrelated subjects, but nevertheless other specific topics such as language are coming up again and again in different contexts. As you say, if the foundation is no good, then anything you build on top of it is pointless, it's irrelevant. And myself and Dr. Wong were chatting yesterday about kind of mind and consciousness and reality, and all these same familiar themes were coming up. And this is it. Seems to be about recognizing where they've designed the language, as we were discussing earlier about legalese, and the Black's Law Dictionaries. Legalese uses English words, but it's not the English language, and this is what they use against us, contractual law and all the rest of it. And this is what's allowed them to take control, create monopolies such as your big pharma, etc., and the rest of us end up locked up in prison. And that's by the by now, it's done and dusted. But at the same time, now you've got like the FDA doing trials for MDMA for PTSD therapy, which is phenomenal, fantastic. But in the meantime, there are people locked up for it. And not only that, I'll mention it again, there's a great series called Undercover, I forgot the name last time, on Netflix, and it just shows the devastation on all levels, from the immigrants who are trafficked in and locked and chained up in basements, cooking up these drug labs and all this kind of stuff. All that can all kind of stop if we just if people, and I like to say woke up, because it sounds, like you're attacking people that they're asleep, and it's not about that. It's about just, as you say, having a chat, getting the information out there, and kind of, right, okay, people look up and think, right, just to look up for a start, and actually, we talked about briefly, and we can get into it now in a second, but about, this whole cannabis argument. And I'll be chatting with a dear brother of mine, soon, Mark Slee, and he's very adamant about, the fact that it's not about legislation, it's not about legalizing it, because that still gives them this element of kind of control. So at the moment then, Darryl, as you were saying about, and I think it's very important to stress, as you already mentioned, that these people are all well-meaning. There's no doubt about that. There will definitely be place people in certain spots who are part of common purpose or anything, these other kind of directives and things like that, who have their agendas and whatnot.
Well,
but
look,
as you
look at what happened in the environmental movement. I mean, literally police, having families with unsuspecting people.
Oh, yeah.
When I've said to various people who've worked undercover, for example, Neil Woods, who's...
I saw Neil Woods, Leap, right?
I mean, he's really got a lot to say and a lot of useful information to say. When he says to me he's absolutely sure that there's no undercover people in the drug policy area or in this field, I think, well, how could you say that? I mean, this is one of the most important areas, isn't it? It's probably more sharp than even the environmental protests. So I'd be very surprised if there wasn't some mischief going on. And I'm not linking this to what this next point, that just going back on something you've said about MDMA science trials, is that there's two sides to that, actually. There is the good side that you say, because this is really opening the door to people to realise that these substances have tremendous potential. They're not necessarily things that can only be misused, and that people can, have responsible and worthy purposes for that. But we also must be very careful about the context in which we argue for medical access to anything, whether it be medical cannabis or these kind of trials with MDMA or psilocybin or any other substance, is that we are politically very, very weak at the moment. The idea of citizenship and human rights has become very degraded, really. And I link this to the end of political struggle at the end of the miners' strike, really, the Thatcher and Reagan time, that there was this big upsurge of left-wing solidarity to try and stand up to the government. And unfortunately, what happened was obviously that those unions were smashed.
Destroyed.
Yeah. And what happened was that those people that were represented collectively, that their power was through collective bargaining. So if you had a problem at work, it would be that your brothers, and I like the way you call me brother, your brothers would be there for you. So if you'd been mistreated, the shop steward would probably go to management and say, well, look, you've mistreated this brother. If you don't put it right, we'll all walk out. And they would sort of call you bluff, and then you'd walk out, and then they'd call you back, compromise, and that would be the bargaining that would happen based upon your wage labour withdrawal. So that created a sort of détente, if you like, between sort of capital and workers. But after the unions were effectively emasculated, if you like, I know they exist still, but they seem to be more concerned about policing speech and making sure that people are not offending each other with the wrong jokes, and they don't seem to have that sharp edge that they used to have in the olden days. It's actually that people are actually very, very different to how they were before, because of the individuals are atomized. They're not really protected by a collective, and they don't identify in the same way of solidarity. They identify more and more as consumers and victims, because this is the language of success now. So in the past, it would be strike action. And what do you think would more likely to happen today? Well, let me explain. You're more likely to say, I'm stressed out at work. You're making me depressed by not respecting me enough and making me work long hours. I'm going to go and see a doctor and get a referral to see a psychiatrist who's going to say that I'm depressed and that you've violated my human rights. And then I'm going to go to a lawyer and get a legal aid certificate. And then I'm going to go with this lawyer's document, I'm going to go off to Strasbourg or some judge who's unelected and ask him to say yes or no. And of course, if he says no, there's nowhere else to go. But you think that's power. It isn't, because you are making a fetish of your political power. Instead of acting politically, you're now seeing it through the lens of victimhood, of illness, and using the law and the courts to try and get redress. Now, good luck to you if you can win. But politically, it's a very different animal now, that you are passive. You define yourself not by what you've done, but by what's being done to you. Poor me. I'm a victim of hate speech. I'm a victim of people laughing at me, making the wrong jokes. I'm going to go and get help with a legal aid certificate. So you're making a fetish of your power through medicine and law. And we need to be aware of this, so that when we, let's say, try to push medical justifications for having access to controlled drugs to the front, we have to be clear that we don't want to be seen as patients to get ahead. It's nice that people are going to be treated, but it's wrong that this leaves everybody else behind, and it then falls into the monopoly of the pharmacracy and big pharma and all these other organizations like Compass and other big money people who are now coming in to the psychedelic and the cannabis markets, trying to get a piece of the action and control it. Because this is not what it was all about.
No.
The idea of these drugs was about personal freedom and autonomy. I'm not saying it has to go as far as anarchy, but it has to retain its essential character before we can just hand it over to other people to play God. Because people often think, well, it'd be a lot better to be dealt with by doctors than the police. But actually, some of these things that they're now saying, whereby we're not going to prosecute you, but we will do if you don't comply with this order to go and have aversion therapy, 20 classes about why you shouldn't take drugs, because you've been taught you won't get a criminal record if you do what we say. Now that is quite insidious, actually. This is about mind control. It's almost like the gulags of imprisoning political prisoners, forcing compliance about ideas. And, drug aversion therapy is not very good. Excuse me, I've just got back to the...
Carry on with that. Yeah, you carry on.
So we need to be a bit careful about how we present the work that MAPS does, for example. And what I'm saying is that I'm not against it. And people get a bit funny with me and say, well, you're opposed to the only thing that's working because it's for veterans, for example. And
yeah.
I always thought, I do feel sorry for veterans. But I also came to this idea when they said, well, veterans should have cannabis. I said, well, does that mean it gives a whole new meaning to the idea that I could kill for a joint? Well,
there we go. Where's the spectrum? Where does it start? Where does it, where does it end then, isn't it?
Yeah, so we do need equality, for all adults, if you like. I'm not saying all people.
Of course.
Necessarily in prisons should have the same rights as civilians, or that kids should have the same right as civilians, or that if you've got a record of psychotic behaviour, you should necessarily have full access to like everybody else might have. But the way I'm trying to square the circle is this, is that if MAPS and these other organisations that are pushing for preferential treatment for their target audience, and they want licenses, is that they must do it in the correct legal paradigm, because that also helps open the door. It doesn't protect their market sector, it opens the door. Then it is really the thin end of the wedge. I don't see these arguments today for commercial cannabis production. The Tory party are talking about, they've got their own drugs policy reform group, but it looks very commercially set up for me. They want to make money out of cannabis. Everybody wants to make money out of these drugs now. Psychedelics as well, huge business interest encroaching in, is that we need to be much more wary of this, because it's commercialization that really made the tobacco and alcohol industry so dangerous, that pushed so hard, that it was sophisticated to drink whiskey and smoke cigarettes. Even, if you were a pilot or something, they would literally have adverts like that. And that is because money is behind it. And I think that many drugs are something too special, too holy in a way. They represent something that is very sacred, that it's a ritual that has to be approached with great respect, many of these things. That it's not something you just do in the pub or after having a curry on the way home. Is that you literally have to be prepared. You are going to meet yourself and your maker in a very profound way with some of these things. And these are very special, and I don't think that necessarily, although I am actually somebody who does advocate freedom for the various market forces and independence and a certain amount of anarchy in society, is that drugs actually is something which is perhaps one of the very few things that should be respected, and I'm not saying it should be completely state controlled, but there should be we do need regulations, because unlike, say, an Amazonian tribe who've been working ayahuasca for millennia and they understand it and they respect it, if we just brought ayahuasca into the corner shops, people would be having it after a Korean night out, and we're absolutely doing themselves in, because we are drug stupid, we are drug naive. And in the interim measure, it's not that I want to be a control freak, but until we get to a mature society that understands that these things have a very important part of society, that they are part of our evolution, and that they will take us to the next step, and they will help us progress as a society, as a species, and help protect the planet, help protect each other by using these substances carefully, is that we can't just unleash them, because we're coming from a situation of profound ignorance, almost like we're kids. It's almost like we have to treat ourselves as kids with candy. You don't just let a kid loose in the candy store, you buy them a single piece. And it's like that now, because we are drug ignorant. So it's not that I'm ultimately some kind of control freak that wants to tell people that you should only have a maximum of 1 gram of MDMA, a month on the license. Otherwise, you can't have it. Who am I to say you can't have 2 grams of MDMA? But it's just, I don't want to get too sort of OCD.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Go on.
The general principle is that, we are in a situation where we need to work into this a little bit carefully, but using the correct paradigm. So if MAPS and the other organisations who are seeking licenses were to adopt the legally correct paradigm, which at the moment they don't, because they say, well, MDMA is illegal and it will be legalised in 25 years, but it's going to be licensed, in 15 years. This paradigm helps support the existing paradigm. And I don't know whether they do it out of ignorance or whether it's self-serving because they want to recoup on their investment. When you put 20 years research into something, you feel like you want to get something back out of it. Mm-hmm. But I don't want anybody to push an idea which is illiberal and makes us into objects in a way, because it's almost slavery. The drug law, the way it's actually applied, it treats us as property. We became the object in a way. As soon as we believed in the idea of illegal or even illicit, drugs. This is actually reduced us in status. And I know people could look up on Wikipedia or something, they could write illegal drug or illicit drug, and they'll get a whole spiel about what it is. It doesn't make it true.
Yeah.
You can ask Wikipedia or Google, does God exist? You're not going to get the answer. You can't get the answer to everything. And there is a social convention to talk about drugs in terms of legalization or illegality or illicit drugs. It's a social convention, but it's had its time. It's wrong. It's not just wrong like morally or because I don't agree with it. It's actually wrong linguistically and legally. And what I'm saying is actually correct in many ways. It has various dimensions to it, if you like, that cross over, and because it works both legally, linguistically, and philosophically. And I say, if you adopt this paradigm, if people get on board with this, it will spread like wildfire, and it will transform the impasse. It will. It is that powerful. It cannot fail. If you want to end prohibition, and if you want to have liberty and be recognized as a magnificent adult with all the glory and possibilities that entails, with all the incredible plants and substances that we have on this planet and what they can do for us, if you want to rescue that, then you must put yourself first, and you must express yourself in terms of yourself, your possibilities of being. It is your possibilities of access to consciousness that have been censored and limited through the misuse of law. And the misuse of law starts with that idea of the illegal drug. And if you want to get control of yourself and beat this, reverse the language to its true form. Speak the truth. Don't speak that mirror image law that they're conditioned you to do. It takes time. It's not easy, which is why people get angry with me. They can't do it because they can't help themselves, because they've been talking about legalizing drugs for 20 years. They've written books, PhDs, and theories all about legalizing drugs. And I come along and say, stop, it's offensive, it's wrong, it can't work. It doesn't make sense. And they go, okay, well, I'll try. And then they realize they can't, because the mind it's neuro-linguistic programming. It's making them say it, and then they get angry. And they say, well, you're full of it, aren't you? I'm going to block you rather than have you criticize my shit. And this is what's happening, is that I've had to become a bit of a pain in the backside because they won't listen. I sat with David Nutt in Leeds for an hour, and he's, talking about this, because I didn't agree with anything he said. We'd written letters to him. Katie wrote the most beautiful, multi-page letter from prison to David Nutt when he was in the advisory council, explaining the whole way the law could work and what he had understood by it. Didn't get a reply. I spoke with David Nutt. I explained to him. He said, oh, yeah, I think you should be on the team. Within a few months of me having this conversation, he brought out a book with the subtitle Legal and Illegal Drugs Without the Hot Air, or something, Illegal and Legal Drugs Without Hot Air. I can't remember. He still decided to do it. Even at Breaking Convention, he was talking about cannabis being made illegal in the 1930s. He's talking about psychedelics becoming illegal. He's still doing it. And he's wrong. He's a brilliant man. He's a brilliant scientist. But he ain't a lawyer, and he hasn't got it right. And we need to reject his paradigm and get him back in the lab and get him working on the incredible work that they can do at Imperial about brain imaging and the rest of it. But the drug policy stuff that they're getting into, I'm sorry to say, I have to tell you the truth, it's wrong. It's wrong. The same with Transform. And it pains me to hear these people coming up with these ideas that we're going to, have a 20-year plan to allow medicinal use of psychedelics, followed by spiritual and religious use, and then later recreational use. Anybody that talks like that doesn't really understand the nature of the experience. It's holistic. You can't split up a medical, spiritual, religious kind of blah, blah, blah. When you've taken psychedelics, that's a whole caboodle. What are they talking about? What on earth are they talking about?
This is what, and as we know, Darryl, it's all been done by design. This is what comes into play there with compartmentalization. And, the way we try and approach now is just everything on the table, And it's just like, there's quite a few different points, trying to pull them all back into my mind. But it is difficult if you've dedicated your, even just a couple of decades even to a sort of specific field, and to be told, actually, that's completely wrong. That cognitive dissonance, and understandable, of course it is, but the problem is where they hold on to it, and also when they're in positions of power or influence. So as you say, where we've got people who, and again, it's all, we should hope with the best meaning, unfortunately, barking up the wrong tree, as we'd say. It's all about getting it all out on the table, isn't it? Like getting all the information together and actually reviewing and saying, look, this is where we need to kind of see where we are and see where we're going wrong. And if people can just, it's just, you say NLP, and it is NLP, it's this programming. We're all programmed.
That's what they're doing. They're making shit up, aren't they? Because if illegal drugs do not exist, if there's no such legal concept, why create a straw man argument to spend 20 years trying to dismantle it? I mean, how, to create that, it's unforgivable. They don't exist. I mean, even if we take the idea of controlled drugs, which is what the law gives us, at least we've got something to work with. You could say, well, controls, they need to be proportionate. It's like driving a car. It's not that driving's illegal. It's like when you drive badly. Yeah. So controlled drugs is what the law gives us. Everybody knows that. And as I say, it's not drugs which control, it's you. Mm. So why did they have to create illegal drugs? Why did they have to create that? And they're the people supposed to be helping us.
Well, my response to that, Darryl, is anyone who thinks the government is out to look after us just needs to have a little look at history, a little review of history, because, that's definitely not the case.
No, I was talking about the drug policy reformers who created the idea of illegal drugs. Actually, the law can't make illegal drugs. There's no such thing in the law. The government will talk that way, obviously, because it suits them. Yeah. But why do we adopt their language?
Yeah.
And what Einstein said is that you can't solve a problem at the level of the problem exists. So they give you this problem. So look at the problem of illegal drugs. And you can't solve it because you're running around in circles. It's linguistically and legally meaningless. Even if you think it means something. People say, well, give me something else to say instead of, so I can call these illegal drugs by another name. And I said, well, you're asking me to describe something that doesn't exist. You want an easy little soundbite to say something that doesn't exist. Fuck the soundbite. It's not about the soundbite. It's about the principle. Your whole life depends on it. Your whole possibility of being depends on it. Don't try to do it in 3 words, because this is the most sacred thing that there is. Mm-hmm. And we need to have reverence for it and put ourselves forward and respect the fact that we're talking about our very existence as entities and where we can go consciously and who's controlling our consciousness. And we need to respect that and take it seriously, not just make stuff up. Oh, these drugs are illegal, aren't they?
I can feel your passion there, Darryl. I really can, and it resonates with me because it is a frustrating situation that we find ourselves in. And I've been looking into a few different things, and I can see now how they are. The interest, the money interest, they're getting their ducks all lined up with regards to behind the scenes, as we mentioned earlier. We've already got GW Pharmaceuticals and all that little shenanigans where on the face of it, they're saying, well, there's no medicinal value in drugs. Mm-hmm. Right, okay. So who are the biggest drug exporters on the planet then? Oh, well, yeah, that would be us. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. And this whole kind of GMO modification of cannabis where it seems to be that, you don't need to mess around with nature. Nature's already awesome. Why do you need to mess around with it?
In your example, GW, that GW means that cannabis is not illegal. I mean, if you needed any sort of simple explanation, how can it be illegal if we are the biggest producers of legally produced cannabis in the world? So how can it be illegal? So if you're still thinking about this, remember what's illegal is they've decided that it's okay for them to do it. It's okay for the police to possess it. It's okay for all the people they want to possess it, but not you. So what this is a subjugation of the ordinary general public based upon the idea that it is illegal, like we're all in it together. No, it is not. And that is how they do it. It can't be illegal.
That's it. And, not some people may not know about this, but kind of my research has led me into the whole kind of, birth certificate, straw man, John Harris Law is an Illusionist on my playlist. If you want to check it out, I think it's the Essential Viewing playlist. When you break it down and you start peeking behind that curtain and seeing exactly how it's all structured and set up, it's just shenanigans. That's all it is. And they've been clever up until now, but unfortunately, people are maybe not quite as fast as we'd like, but people are awakening to the situation and seeing what's going on. So I'm just kind of hoping that. Go on, just what you said.
I think I do. When you mentioned that, John Howe said this is the Freeman idea, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah. So a lot of the things that you've said are going to resonate with people who watch the following video with David Robinson, the Lawful Rebellion, not Lawful Rebellion, sorry, but it is practicing lawful dissent. Is the the page.
There are some aspects of that do appeal to me in a way. I mean, I'm not someone who would ever turn up in court and use a Freeman argument. I mean, I'm not going to get into it because I realised that I had been arrogant as a lawyer before and dismissed stuff, and then later on realised that actually there was something in it. And what I do like is the idea of the sovereign individual, because this chimes with cognitive liberty. I've got this big thing that really what we ought to be arguing for is a right to cognitive liberty. And that is something that will be a legal right, which has two limbs to it. So the first one is that as a generally law-abiding adult without any serious mental health problems, you have the right to access substances as you see fit, provided you don't cause antisocial behaviour. That's the first aspect. You have dominion over your own consciousness. And the second limb is to protect that, is that nobody can force you to take a drug or give you a drug surreptitiously, or even some kind of technology, like these hypnagogic machines and things which alter your mental state against your will. And I like the idea of the sovereign individual that the Freeman of the Land arguments do, but I don't want anybody to imagine that what I'm saying is in fact related to that, because I'm not saying the law has no jurisdiction over us. I'm saying it does, but it has to do it according to the rule of law, according to the principles of common law, which it insists that the administration of law must be done reasonably and not somewhat with a nod to proportionality and not illegally. So, and it also has to be rights compliant, so that we have our rights to privacy and property and our rights to thought and consciousness. So the problem with the rights is that we're actually invisible to rights, because whilst the illegal drug idea exists, we are invisible to rights. So what I'm saying is not really sort of like the law has no jurisdiction. I'm saying its jurisdiction is being misused on the basis of a bad administration. So I'm not really, this is what, I don't want to just turn up in court and just basically stick a finger up and say, look, this is what I think of your law.
Well, that's never going to work, is it?
Yeah, no. And what I'm saying is that I respect the law. I respect the law so much that I have to reject this law, because this law is not really law. It's a secondary law. You've not actually carried out your duties under the Act. For example, the Advisory Council has never had a meeting to discuss the two most dangerous misused drugs in Britain. I'm not suggesting that a beer is more dangerous than heroin, but actually the amount of harm that's come from alcohol misuse, it actually outweighs all the harm from all the controlled drugs put together. So it's incredible, isn't it? If you think
it is.
Here it is, the Advisory Council, and for 10 years under David Nutt it was the same, because he was labouring under a misconstruction of the law that somehow it wasn't his job to look at alcohol and tobacco, except when with reference to polydrug misuse. So if you mixed alcohol with barbiturates, it then becomes an issue, but not on its own because it's a legal drug. That was quite wrong. But it's incredible the Advisory Council, whose express duty is to keep under review the misuse of drugs in Britain and to make recommendations to ameliorate the social problems caused by misuse of drugs, never in their history ever bothered to have a meeting about alcohol and tobacco or other drugs. And that's because they're all following the same Pied Piper leading them astray. We've been led down the garden path. And unfortunately, all the experts are not getting it right. Now, I know this puts me in an extraordinarily arrogant position. It looks like I'm trying to puff my own ego up. But I just happen to have picked up this ball, and I realise that it's made of gold. It is absolutely correct. I'm fortunate to have picked it up, and I'm determined not to waste it. But it's not about me. It's about every person. Every person has to get a grasp about who they are legally and what their rights are. Because listening to the normal drug policy debate about, whether some child should have medicinal cannabis or not is never going to get to the heart of the matter. Yes, it evokes your compassion. You want to help. You want to sign a petition to get cannabis for a sick child. And why not? But the problem with drug policy is not viewed properly through the lens of sickness and victimhood. It's only properly viewed through the language of I'm an adult. Where does your jurisdiction stop? Oh, and it seems that since the end of the Cold War, the public sphere of interest in what you do is becoming ever decreasing circles. So it's now obsessing about, what's happening in the family home and what's going on in your head. What kind of speech, how do you practice safer sex? How do you speak to people? Do you use the right pronouns? Are you thinking about things in the right way? Are you recycling your straws? All these things that are now micromanaging really, really down. And that's because the protection of the public sphere that we had as, a political unit, a solid unit of people who were in it together. And that bounced all the power, this intrusion from the state off. That's all been broken. And the power of the state and the police are getting more and more interested in everything down to, how many vegetables have you had? Have you done your morning exercises? And it's very, very insidious, and we have to fight back. Even if we think that it's for our own good, it isn't benevolent. So when we talk about changing drug policy to a health-based one, obviously I'm into harm reduction. Obviously I don't think people should be dying at festivals. I support organisations like the Loop unreservedly. But we have to also remember that we have to not portray ourselves only as victims, and that if we give the government the power to control our health, which is something that the Misuse of Drugs Act isn't really about, it's about more to do with social harms, like sort of anarchy you got in the streets in city centres due to alcohol misuse. That's the kind of thing that the Misuse of Drugs Act should be focusing on, not whether or not you'll be better off with a different strain of cannabis and feel a little bit sort of healthier if you did this or that, the other. It's very tempting to go down that route. And a lot of people are going, yes, it needs to be harm-based. We should give it to the Department of Health and not the Home Office. Seems sensible. But at the same time, you've got to create a whole new role for yourself, because it will be a lot more controls. It won't only be the public order controls that the Home Office are interested in, but you'll have the medical profession telling you what to eat and how many times a week you're allowed to do this drug or that drug. Really quite intrusively. And of course, it's only based upon a theory. They don't really know. They don't really know. It's, I'm not against education and people having good information to hand, but as soon as it becomes like this, you must have half a pill. I mean, it's going that extra mile, and it's starting to become very coercive. And I think we need to respect people's ability to make choices. I mean, there's a lot of this now. We don't really trust the public. There was a referendum. People voted about Brexit or something. I don't want to get right into that, obviously. But it's like, well, you got it wrong. Well, it doesn't matter if they got it right or wrong. They got it. They did something. And it's always like, you're not making the right choices. You're not doing this. You're going to make yourself ill. Well, I don't mind, information, education being there in the background. But the whole idea of having the Department of Health choose how our lifestyles is also a problem, because it's giving yet more power to the state. It's a bit like, when the police got tasers, people thought it was so liberal. So isn't it better to be tasered than shot? How much better would it be? Let's give the police tasers. Now, of course, now the police use tasers in places they would never have used guns. They use tasers inside police stations to restrain people. They never would have just blown you away with a 38 special for resisting in a police station. They'd have knocked you with a truncheon. But now, a taser could just be used. And that's how something which appears to be soft actually extends state power. And you give the rights to control drug policy to not only the Home Office, but also the Department of Health. And you'll find that a very sort of patronising administration will follow where it's a sort of 5 beds a day kind of drug policy. And I think drug policy, drugs are a little bit more anarchistic than that, aren't they? They're a little bit more on the edge than that. And I think it is about, going across the neutral zone. And I think also, I was talking before about this censorship of possibilities that the law represents. And a lot of people might think, well, I break the law anyway, it doesn't mean anything to me, so I'm not censored. But I wanted to understand, or people to understand, maybe you probably already thought of it, but when you take, or if you take any kind of seriously mind-altering drug, which could include cannabis, but mainly psychedelics, is that you're taking it in a context of prohibition. So that the experience you have is very, very different. So the experience you may have of smoking a spliff in an Amsterdam coffee shop is very different to smoking it in Swindon Town Centre. The paranoia that you may get, you're more sensitive to it because of the drug that you've taken. It does make you more sensitive to fears and concerns and these things. But nevertheless, it's the social construct of opprobrium, that smell, those molecules are getting over there to those people's noses, that actually starts to trigger the paranoia. And it's the same thing when you take psychedelics, is that you're taking the context where nobody else, hardly anybody else that you may encounter, is familiar with the state that you're in. And if they see you behaving in any odd way, they're going to judge you. And of course, you could be arrested, and you could be, just literally, I've seen the police take kids, 15-year-old kids on high-dose magic mushrooms who've been naked and thrown them in a cell and told them to sleep it off.
Just disgraceful.
This is the ignorance that we've got. So don't ever think that you can escape the clutches of prohibition and social opprobrium just by breaking the law and going up into the neutral zone to go and experience the things that I was talking about beyond the membrane. Because you will touch them, but the experience will be completely corrupted. And just taking drugs in a laboratory, for some experiment and in a brain scanner isn't exactly the way that these substances are best used either. All these experiments at Imperial and other colleges, and where people are having MDMA as well with a psychiatrist. I mean, psychiatry now it's being presented as the vanguard of progress. But psychiatry was never really the working class's friend. I mean, psychiatry has been used throughout the ages to imprison people, and it's been very much a science of, dubious at times. There's been some pretty bad things done in the name of psychiatry. Again, I think Mr. Sessa, Dr. Sessa rather, and other people who are pushing only through this paradigm of mental disease, is that this fits into the model that I was talking about before, the destruction of the collectives, so that we present ourselves as victims. So it's almost the way forward, isn't it? Say, well, I've got all these things, it's a badge of honor, almost like, I've got these mental problems, I need it. And it is a way of self-victimizing and other things. So I do think the way out of this is, I don't want to throw all that away. I mean, I don't want to throw away all this research. I'm not suggesting it shouldn't happen. All I'm saying is that the legal context that I'm offering helps it take these things and brings them together. It literally joins those camps. You may be aware that sometimes at conferences like Breaking Convention, there's actually a bit of a chasm between two camps. You have your science camp, your doctors and hard-edged black-letter law kind of people. And then you have the sort of more hippie, the shaman, those who are interested in indigenous practices and rituals. And they seem to be coming from completely different angles. And it's true, they are. But actually, I believe that the paradigm that I'm explaining, the words that I'm using to talk about drug policy, will bring everything together because it doesn't divide. At the moment, when you argue for spiritual use or medical use of a drug, you are making divisions between yourself and others. It's like, I am holier than thou because I am entitled, because I'm a native Indian, I can have peyote. Holier than thou. I've got a license to do this. Divide yourself from the other.
That's one of our big problems, isn't it? The whole division, and it is the old cliche, divide and conquer. But it's true. It is true, and with all these different, things that they use to keep us divided, they are winning. But as you say, do you see the melting pot starting to come together with it? I've not been to any of these. I've seen a few bits online, the breaking conventions.
Oh, well, they can. I think that the organisers like to present it as a very harmonious event where everybody comes together. And in many regards, there's a lot to be said. There's a lot of wonderful things that happen. And people generally pretty open with each other. But no, on a theoretical level, definitely not. There's a lot of people are very, very concerned about the investment, the big money coming in into MAPS and the control of psychedelics, because it's suddenly taken off. But it's all about, like the controlling the valve. They want to have the keys to the citadel, if you like. And everybody's fighting for it. So the doctors want it, the government wants it, the businesses want it. Whereas in fact, it should be us and our community leaders that have it, our shaman, our inspirational figures who've experienced these states, the people who have got all that experience. They're the people that should be guiding us, but not motivated for ego or capital. But unfortunately, it's all working on ego and capital. So a lot of people, they're speaking and they think they're the sense of the universal, that they're going to make money out of this. And I'm not saying that I'm any better than anybody else, but I believe that the message that I have is better. I believe that the message is very universal. I don't want to divide people up into cannabis users and non-cannabis users. I use this for this purpose. I'm saying it doesn't, interesting, yes, we can talk about it, but at the end of the day, we have to wrap it all up in a very different package, because if you just come up with a green focus, and even a medical green focus, you're talking about 0.1% of the population now, and you think it's the thin end of the wedge, as I said before. You think it's a Trojan horse to destroy prohibition. No, it isn't. It's actually a window into profiteering. It gives them more and more power. Of course, they want to take people out of the criminal justice system, but it's so damn expensive. Yeah, when they start saying that we're going to allow you to possess small amounts of cannabis, perhaps, and you think, wow, we've cracked it. No, you haven't. It's just the expediency to help the machine keep going, because it costs millions and millions of pounds to do this. And if they can control you better by giving you a little ounce of something every month, because you've got a ticket from your doctor, it isn't actually liberty creating at all. People think drugs create liberty. They don't. Drugs are not creating environmental awareness as such. It has to be done in a context. Drugs could be used for good or bad purposes. The idea that just because people have got cannabis is that somehow we've progressed. We haven't. We can only progress politically. We only can progress when we recognise as human beings and we have autonomy. And the line shouldn't be drawn at cannabis. It shouldn't be. It's not that I want to legalise everything, because you can't legalise everything. What I'm trying to do is legalise people who behave appropriately. Why should you be deemed to be acting illegally when you haven't actually caused anybody any problem? And it doesn't start with cannabis. But nobody even knows if you've had any cannabis. It's because you're behaving reasonably. Oh, so you've got cannabis in your pocket? Fine. It doesn't matter. You could have mushrooms in your pocket or MDMA in your pocket. The fact is that you haven't done anything wrong yet. As soon as you supply the MDMA to a 14-year-old, then you cross the line. But you see, it's not drug-specific and it's not purpose-specific. This is what we've made a fetish of. We've made a fetish of substances, because that's the way we're trained to think, that these substances have status and the purpose we're using them, like medical, spiritual, recreational. But all these labels are nonsense, and they're all that's dividing us. We forget all of that, and we come as a human being in our environment, and we demand to be permeable to the natural environment unless there's a good reason to stop us.
That resonates. I think.
And I just want to say one other thing is that
go on.
When I say that drugs are not illegal, people often come back and say, well, it's the use of drugs that's illegal, isn't it?
Right.
Well, I want everybody to know that there is no crime of using drugs either, except for one drug in Britain, which is opium. I'm speaking about Britain, by the way. If people use in other countries,
I imagine there might be. So it's good to clarify. Thank you.
So opium is the only drug which is illegal to use, and the reason for that is because what we were saying earlier, it's the misuse of drugs, so they can afford reasonable differentiation between activities with controlled drugs which cause antisocial problems from those that do not.
So from a point of interest, and if I may ask quickly, because the Drug Act or the Misuse of Drugs Acts are relatively recent, but the kind of opium business, that was kind of Victorian times, right? So was it, the reason I ask is you say where they've got these little sub-clauses, if you like, then within the Drugs Act where that allows Big Pharma to do their thing and all the rest of it. With the opium that you were just describing, when was that made a thing?
I think that was at the turn of the last century. So I think that was the Hague Convention. It was what's going on. The Shanghai Convention was that they did have a problem with opium misuse. So at that time, apart from the fact the British were obviously the big opium dealers, and they tried to get everybody in China and India addicted to the stuff to flog it. So we were massive drug pushers.
HSBC coming to you.
Yeah, and I still talk about Her Majesty's drug pusher because they've got a monopoly on their drugs. That's why they don't want people selling the other drugs, because it interferes with their monopoly.
That's
and
it.
they do the monopoly of doctors as well, which is another big thing. Don't underestimate the medical profession in this. They fought. I don't want to have a go at doctors, but historically, they fought against midwives. They didn't want midwives to have the power to deliver babies because it was a slice of their pie. And lawyers don't want people to have the right to do stuff either. They like the idea that there's going to be a lot of work with all these controlled drugs. It creates 50% of some lawyers' work or more. So, but yes, because it was deemed to be almost impossible for ordinary people to use opium sensibly, and it was a social ill, is that they actually said, well, you can't use it. And when they then drafted the Misuse of Drugs Act, which I think was drafted in 1970 in response to Nixon's so-called war on drugs, which is an expression I really hate, obviously, because it's a very objectifying thing. I mean, let's just look at that, because I think we've done the opium thing. Because that's the legacy to that. But this expression, war on drugs, and of course you get all these well-doers. I mean, a few people have moved on from that expression, but I still read it all the time. Let's put a stop to the war on drugs. It isn't working. I mean, how bad is this? First of all, isn't working. Let's look at the last bit first. It isn't working. Well, what does that mean? Would you be happy if it was working, that nobody ever could have access to any drugs? Is that what this is really about? That would be terrible. That would be dystopian. We are drugs in a way. Drugs have given everything to humanity. And of course, what are drugs anyway? The whole social concept of drugs really needs to be looked at. And there's a lot of people who have written very extensively and far more informed than me about this. But I'll just basically summarize it as, I think there's a social construct given to the word drugs that we accept. So when somebody says, oh, he's on drugs, oh yeah, we know what we mean. But actually, you don't say that to somebody in the pub, or somebody drinking coffee, or somebody binging on sugar, or anything. You don't say they're on drugs at all. Yet they are.
Yeah.
So why do we actually allow ourselves to prejudice certain people who we ostensibly are trying to support here, aren't we? And say, well, we support the rights of drug users, or nice people take drugs, at least. Well, old people take drugs. I don't believe there's anybody who doesn't take drugs. And of course, drugs are things that come from the doctor, over the counter, on prescriptions, in jars at the supermarket. and of course from dealers and people growing themselves and the rest of it. So, let's just be honest about the word drugs. And then the idea of having a war on drugs, well, I mean, that's like saying Hiroshima was a war on concrete, again.
It's just bonkers, isn't it? And if anyone...
How?
I'm just going to say... Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's dehumanizing. So they've come up with this idea then, well, it's a war on some drugs because it doesn't include the drugs of the majority. But of course it isn't, it goes beyond that. It's a war on some people who use some drugs, if you like. I think I prefer that. But you could even go further because not only does that create a huge amount of collateral damage which affects the whole society, but it is actually a censorship of the non-drug user as much as the drug user. Because let's say that you are a drug virgin and you say, well, this doesn't apply to me because it's a war on some people. No, it is a war on your possibility of ever being able to be in a society that recognizes the benefits of these things, that actually makes them available when you need them. That's all shut down for you. Like David Nutt says, the science has been shut down. So it doesn't even come into possibilities. Those people say, well, I'm not interested in drugs. Fair enough. I'm not trying to push drugs on them. Definitely not. That's your choice. But bear in mind that those choices and the ideas that you have about drugs are all polarized and propagandized, if you like, through the lens of prohibition and misinformation. And of course, a lot of work people do is about providing more information, saying that the cannabis is quite good actually for these things, MDMA can do this. So that's fine. That's fine. But the war on drugs expression is a horrible expression. And I just don't know why anybody would want to say, let's put on the war on drugs isn't working. I mean, it's an opening gambit. It's not very good, is it?
Well, this is it. And if anyone wants to look into it a bit deeper, they can check out Sean Atwood's books on the war on drugs, breaking it down quite nicely. And he's done a good bit of deep research, and it's kind of self-evident really when you look into it. But I would highly recommend people check those series of books out. They're fantastic. Well, Darryl, I must say this has been an absolutely fascinating chat. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much, sir. And I'm sure we'll be able to continue it further because it's sparked up quite a few thoughts. But I won't get into it today because I don't want to drag out the video any longer. You know how it is. It's best to kind of keep these, within the realms. So what I will do though is when we come back, we can look into a few other things like what we discussed earlier, for example. We won't get into it now, but cause my battery's a little bit low and I don't want it to die on us, is the stuff we were talking about the constabularies and some enforcing and some not, and where we're getting into the realms then, because, the whole thing about, we subscribe to common law, which in its essence is just essentially do no harm, cause no loss, but at the same time, take no shit. You have the right to defend yourself as well. And, this is where we're at. We've been taking a lot of shit for a lot of time, Darryl, and it's time to stop, and I hopefully, we're going to get a bit of a following on the podcast. Let's fingers crossed. And let's get this information out there for people to kind of just, let it simmer and see if it resonates. And I'm sure it's going to resonate with a lot of people. Well, I know it's going to resonate with a lot of people, but
we're in the minority right now. We're in the minority.
We are. Yeah, I wouldn't have it any other way.
This will gain traction.
It will. And that's what I feel like, Sean said to me, you should do your own little podcast. I said, oh, maybe. And I thought, no, do you know what? Yeah, I know enough people to kind of try and get something off the go. And it's just, as I say, I'm not interested in making money off it. If that comes later on down the line, that'll be beautiful. But at this point in time, I think it's just about getting people like ourselves together and just everything on the table. That's what I always come back to. Everything out on the table. So thank you again, Darryl. I really appreciate that. I'll put a link for your video in the description box, the one that you sent me from the 2015. Is there anything else you'd like to promote? Do you have a website or anything like that? Or
well, we do have a website called the Drug Equality Alliance. It's not something that I keep up to date because something to be discussed another time. I had some issues from the court saying that they didn't want me to take more cases, and otherwise I would actually suffer adverse consequences. So I put it on hold, and my idea now is to enroll more people in the public to garner support, so that I'm then able to go back and make a legal challenge against the government and the Home Office about what they're doing. At the moment, I need the public backing to do that. So my website is more of a historical archive of facts, but there's an awful lot on it.
We'll put the link in the description box for sure. Yeah, and everyone can check it out.
And it's been great. It's been great because there's not that many people who are open-minded to draw this out of me. And I've given you a lot of information today, and that's because you've been an extremely good listener, asking the right questions. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Oh, my absolute pleasure, Darryl. And as I say, thank you again for coming on, brother. And we shall speak again soon.
I look forward to it.
Take care, brother. All the best. See you soon.
Take care,
buddy. All the best.